Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 2, Episode 5. Today is Sunday, January the 25th, 2015. My name is Graham Perro. With me this week are Tyler Fitch and Melissa Daphne. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about tonight. First of all, we have the Q&A app running. At least I hope we do. Apparently last week we had some issues with that where it didn't seem to be running, but we got no notification that it wasn't. So hopefully that's running. If you go to our Google Plus page, which you can get to at google.com/plusaddictedtolacrosse. There should be a link there to this particular episode, and you should be able to ask questions there. If you want to and can't, then probably the best way to reach us would be Twitter. We are at Lax Podcast, and we all have our Twitter apps running right now, so we should be notified of that right away if you have questions or comments or anything. What else? I guess the place to start is probably with Tyler, I would guess, with the Corey Small trade. Seemed like an interesting trade, but not sure it's solving the problem that the Stealth actually had.
Yeah, I see if the team's looking for a lefty forward. I don't know why they probably at least tried, but for what they paid, they seemed to could have got maybe Logan Shush out of Minnesota, who's a BC kid not looking to play closer to home, but can't play as many games in Minnesota because of his work requirements this year. But Minnesota maybe didn't want to part with him. They really like what they got there, and that makes sense. So Corey Small comes in as another lefty forward for the Stealth. They end up dropping Caleb Wiles, a rookie who's only played a game or two, maybe 3 with the team. I thought this was a chance where the team could drop Lewis Ratcliffe and replace him with Small. They are very similar players, but they did not. They're keeping Lewis, and they just rotated in Corey for a more established player over Caleb Wiles. We'll talk about the game later. It didn't appear to work out, but Small came in ready to go and had a good impact for the Stealth offense. 2 first-round picks is a little steep, but I don't know. Lefty forwards are the rarest, or productive lefty forwards are the rarest breed in the NLL, I think. So they can have a high cost like this. Either of you have any more thoughts on it?
I saw somebody joking that with all the trades that Vancouver's done over the years, that they don't have a first-round draft pick officially until like 2023 or something.
It's probably because Minnesota has them all.
It'll be a while.
Okay, the other piece of news this week, and I guess we'll get to that during the when we talk about the Edmonton-Calgary game, is the return of Derek Keenan to the Edmonton bench. Keenan took an indefinite leave of absence in the middle of December, and then I guess his wife was very sick. He announced at the annual awards back in September that she was fighting pancreatic cancer, and I believe the team knew about it last year, and so, I mean, they were obviously one of the most cohesive teams you've ever seen in the NLL, one of the best defensive teams. Obviously, they went 15-0 at one point, so they had an awesome season, and I'm pretty sure that was a big part of it. But Wendy Keenan passed away in, I believe it was about the 3rd of January. And so obviously Keenan was away for a few weeks, and he's decided that he's recovered enough, for lack of a better word, that he can return to the Rush bench. So he did that this past weekend, and like I said, we'll get to that in the Edmonton-Calgary game, but it seemed to have a pretty darn positive effect on the Rush. Okay, so one other topic we want to talk about before we get to the games, and Melissa, I'll turn this over to you. Where's the line on taunting, as you put it, in terms of the teams talking to other teams, whether it's trash talk or whatever, or the PA announcer, I believe, is what you're referring to this time?
I would say in general, where's the line? Obviously, the players taunt back and forth. Fans taunt, the PA announcers. I know sometimes cross the lines. Willie B definitely raises hackles across the league, sometimes even in the Pepsi Center with his own fans. He definitely he definitely gets slapped on the hands, at least every season for making fun of Dutch every time he's playing on the field, which is funny because almost every time he does it, Dutch scores almost immediately after, so you'd think he would stop doing it. But the big thing that, for me, this time that really, I guess you could say, got my hackles up and really I just couldn't believe they did it, is 11 goals up, with maybe a minute left in the game, the Mammoth put on the Jumbotron a big meme, the one with Willy Wonka, and it said San Jose, Washington, Vancouver. So where are you moving to next? And I thought, one, it was tasteless because anytime a team has to move or fails like that in some way, it's a huge deal. It impacts the entire league. It's not good. It's not funny. Fans lose. And then, on the other hand, hello, Mammoth, you didn't come from scratch. You were in Baltimore and Pittsburgh and D.C. So it's even, worse because it's the pot and the kettle, essentially. It's like, don't throw rocks if you live in a glass house type thing. And it was just, to me, it was really tactless. And so one of the things we were discussing after the game last night was, would it have been different, say, if the game was tied? Is stuff like that okay then? Because we've all seen the stuff on the Jumbotron. They like to do the kiss cam, put it on the players or the coaches, and sometimes the players will play along. One of the favorites with the Mammoth is they like to have a little laughing Elmo, after a penalty play, when we score on a power play, and laughs at the player who got out of the box. So you have those things, and some of that is a part of the game, but where is that line? Would that have been okay if the game was tied and they're trying to rally everybody up? Is it still tactless? I personally think so. But the fact that we were 11 goals up, it was like really even worse to me. It was just like, wow, that is just really crass. I can't believe the organization did that. Because if it would have been Willie B taunting something like that, well, it's Willie B. Willie B says some stupid things. He's passionate. He's basically a fan. But when you're putting something on the Jumbotron like that, that essentially is the organization saying, hey, this is what we think. And the fact that that could have made it to the Jumbotron, it's like, wow, what was the organization thinking? It kind of blew my mind.
Shouldn't the Mammoth be ecstatic that the team's in Vancouver, because the Washington Stealth, I think, maybe only lost to the Mammoth once in the history of the Washington Stealth, and that was when Chris Hall was sick, if they lost that season to them. And in the last 2 years in San Jose, they never beat the Stealth either. So they should be pretty happy that the Stealth are in Vancouver, because the Vancouver Stealth is a team the Mammoth can beat, unlike the other Stealth teams.
Yeah, the Washington Stealth really did have a good history. I mean, the Mammoth, well, especially it's like if you're teasing somebody about, having a bad record. Well, the Mammoth only have one cup. I mean, we've only made it past the first round like twice. I mean, we've only made it to the championship cup round once. I mean, so if you start doing things like that, it's like, well, who are you to talk? So
I know there's been some I don't want to say trash talk, but that sort of thing over Twitter in the last few weeks. It's all been playful stuff. The Nighthawks are particularly good at it, as well as the Stealth, actually. And there was some talk between the Rock and the Bandits before this past Friday's game, because the Rock had announced it as a guaranteed win night, so that everybody who had bought a single game ticket for that game would get a free ticket to an upcoming game if the Rock lost. And of course the Bandits took huge advantage of that by telling their fans, hey, if you go up to Toronto for this game and we win, you get a free ticket to another game. So let's fill the house with Bandits fans. And so it's kind of good that way when you see that kind of playful banter, trash talk, whatever it is, back and forth. Somebody was doing that to the Nighthawks as well, saying something about starting 0-2. And they said, so we can't hear you with all these championship rings in our ears. So that kind of stuff is fun, and I kind of like that. I'm not as you said, Melissa. I'm not as happy with what the Mammoth did because, like you said, they're not an expansion team. They went through 3 different cities before they found Colorado, and obviously they've been very successful in Colorado. So they've sort of found their home and aren't likely to be moving anytime soon, whereas we don't know that about the Stealth. Maybe this will be where the Stealth stay for the next 10 years. Maybe they'll stay 2 years and move somewhere else. We just don't know. But to bring that up, like you said, teams moving and teams folding in the LL is very common. We've all seen it 100 times, but it's not a good thing, and certainly don't think it's a good thing to be making fun of. Okay, so I guess that's what we think about that. Let's see. Let's see how that goes in the future, and if there's any other fallout from that. One other thing I wanted to mention with relation to that was I actually looked in the rule book. This is a blog post that I made a couple of years ago where I actually did look through the rule book just to see what was there, and found a bunch of interesting rules and mentioned them. And one of them, and I'll read out the rule. This is Rule 20.1. This is, I think, in the 2013 rule book, but I'm pretty sure it's still there. Talking about what the PA announcer has to say, and it says, public address announcers shall not communicate derogatory or disparaging comments toward any individual players on the opposing team and toward the officials. Failure to do so will result in a fine to the announcer by the league. So my conclusion was either the league doesn't consider calling somebody douche derogatory or disparaging, or Willie B pays a whole bunch of money in fines. And from the sounds of things,
he gets around it.
He does.
Because now he'll say, I can't tell you guys to say this, but who has the ball? And so now you have chunks of the crowd that will still do it. But I think that rule probably came about because he did actually keep saying, actually calling Dutch douche.
I know the Rock announcer kind of does. He doesn't do an awful lot of that. Like if the Rock are winning, he's trying to promote the Rock and get the crowd into it and stuff. But very rarely does he ever say anything about the other team, whether it's calling them out or joking around about them or anything. He rarely says anything about the other team. He will do that with the Rock though, on occasion. There was one game a couple of years ago, I think it might even have been a postseason game, where the Rock and the Bandits were playing, and the Bandits were just demolishing the Rock. I think it ended up being like 25-10 or some insane thing. They just got smoked. So near the end of the game, everybody in the place knows that this game is over, and they're just playing out the last 4 or 5 minutes, and the Bandits take a penalty. And normally when the Bandits or the opposing team takes a penalty, the Rock announcer is yelling, "It's a Rock power play!" trying to get everybody all up and excited. And this time he just said, "It's a Rock power play." Like, yahoo! So that was kind of funny that he was... It was obvious that, trying to get the crowd riled up at this point is really not that useful. But yeah, I haven't heard him say anything derogatory about the other team, so that's kind of a good thing.
Yeah, Willie B is definitely known to push the limits on that, and I know he's been fined a few times. I mean, when he announces the opposing team, he mumbles their name and encourages booing, which, going back to the taunting, where's that line? Those kinds of things you expect to a certain point. He definitely sometimes crosses that line, and I know some announcers in the other league I've heard follow suit a little bit, but he definitely pushes that envelope.
Okay, let's move on to the games of the week, starting with Buffalo and Toronto on Friday night. And it sounds like you guys were unable to watch this game. I don't know if it was on TV at all in the U.S. It was on through the TSN Go app in Canada. I was at the game, so I can actually talk about it from that point of view. So I guess you guys probably won't have many comments of it unless you were able to see it on the replay somehow. Yeah,
you're right.
Okay, so it was a good game. You guys missed a really exciting game. There's lots of back and forth. The game was tied at the end of 1, at the end of 3. The Bandits led at the half, but only by 2. I don't think anybody had a lead of more than 3, and only for a short period of time. So it was a close game all the way through. This was Nick Rose's first appearance of the year after Brandon Miller played games 1 and 2, and he played great. He didn't look rusty. He didn't look like he hadn't played in a long time. Obviously, he's been practicing and that sort of thing with the team, but he looked really good. There was one period, I think, in the third quarter where he just made 3 outstanding stops in the space of about 5 seconds. It was one of those cases where he makes a great save and there's a rebound, and you figure, okay, well, they'll pick the rebound and put it over top of him because he's on his back right now. And he stopped the second one, and then it happened again, and he stopped the third one. So yeah, he played a great game. For the Bandits, Benesh and Dane Smith are turning into a pretty lethal 1-2 combination. John Tavares was hurt early in the game. We just sort of happened to look down at the Bandits bench and think, I haven't seen Tavares out there in a long time. Looked down on the bench, couldn't find him anywhere. Eventually found through Twitter that he had been injured somehow in the first, maybe the first quarter. I can't remember exactly when. But he missed the rest of the game, so I don't know how badly he's hurt. But yeah, Benesh and Dane Smith just looked really, really good together, passing back and forth. They just seemed to know where each other were going to be. Stefan LeBlanc had another good game. I think he was up around 9 points. And I think the Rock have had somebody up around 8 or 9 or 14 points in almost every game this year. I guess except for the Rochester game, which we'll get to later. Mark Stainhouse is still a pest, still a great player. Great at any end, like at both ends of the floor, whether he's on transition, whether he's playing defense. I watched him make a couple of really nice defensive plays, and obviously he's a lethal goal scorer as well. Transition didn't seem to be a big factor here. The Rock transition players and the Bandits transition players had like a goal and an assist each or something like this. It wasn't much. Something happened at the end of the game, and I still have yet to see exactly what happened. What I saw was the Rock had the ball down at the Bandits' end. The Bandits turned it over, managed to get the ball, came running down the other end, but before they could really do anything, the Rock had stripped the ball from them and started coming back the other way. That's when I noticed Troy Cordingley doing this frantically, trying to call a timeout. But of course, by that point, the Rock had the ball again, so the ref just said, nope, you can't call a timeout. And so he started screaming and yelling, as he does when he's angry. At this point, there's only 10 seconds left in the game. The Rock threw the ball around a little bit, and that was it. So after the game was over, Anthony Cosmo went flying over to the ref area, that little semicircle there, and he was just livid at something. I don't know if it was the same thing, whether they were trying to call a timeout and the ref didn't see it, or if he was yelling about something else, but he was just really mad. Accordingly, we went over the same thing, and they started yelling at the refs. Cosmo took a break from that, actually went back, joined the handshake line, and then went back to start yelling at the refs again. So it looked like there was a timeout call that had been missed with 30 seconds left in the game. They're only down by 2, so it's not like it's a 10-goal game or something, and a timeout at that point would be meaningless. So I'm guessing that's what it was, but as I said in my game report, if Troy Cordingley has to calm you down, you're really mad. So I don't know what got into Cosmo, but he was just really ticked. So he started yelling at the refs a little bit more. Troy pulled him off. They went off to the dressing room, and that was it. So I haven't seen too much about what happened there. Another thing that happened just before the whistle went at the end of the fourth, this was just after Troy was trying to call the timeout. Something flew from the Bandits' bench down toward where the ref was. It looked to me like a shoe at the time, and I think later on we decided it was somebody's glove, because taking off your shoe and throwing it makes no sense, whereas taking off a glove and throwing it could easily have happened. And I looked later, and Billy D. Smith got an unsportsmanlike penalty and unsportsmanlike misconduct. Game misconduct. So make about the game, and then we'll move on. And as say what you will about the Bandits, and they've been known as a very undisciplined team for a decade or more, particularly when Darius Kilgore was the coach. I've heard them described as a team full of thugs, which may be a bit strong. But say what you will, they did something that was exceptionally classy, I thought, at the beginning of this game. They had a tribute to Terry Sanderson. So the Rock players came out, they actually formed a T at the center of the floor, and they played a little video of Sanderson. They also mentioned a bunch of other people in the lacrosse world who had passed away, including Jim Jennings and Tucker Williams and Chris Hall. But after the video of Terry Sanderson, the Bandits player who were out standing on their restraining line, and the Rock players were down on their restraining line, the Bandits players all just crossed the floor, shook a few hands, gave a few hugs, and then went back again. As far as I could tell, it was sort of an unscripted thing. It wasn't part of the thing that the Rock had set up. The Rock actually thanked them later on Twitter. Anthony Cosmo actually did the whole handshake line pretty much. He basically went down the whole team and gave everybody a handshake or a hug, stopping for a few seconds to talk to Josh Sanderson. I thought that was just a really classy move by the Bandits, so good on them for that.
Yeah, Cosmo played for Sanderson in Brampton and for Terry and then with Josh for several Man Cup championships, so they've got deep ties.
Yeah, I originally thought, oh, that's because Cosmo used to play for the Rock. That was over 10 years ago. So I'm sure there's some of that still there. And like you said, these guys all know each other from the NLL and from WLA and from MSL and from Junior and from who knows where else. But yeah, so that was good for the Bandits. So moving on to the next game, Minnesota, New England. I watched a bit of this one, but I've been talking for a long time, so Melissa, I'm going to let you take over.
All right. It was an interesting game. The score, I don't think, was quite as reflective of the way it was played. When you see a score like that, you really think one of the teams just was playing poorly. But New England actually was playing fairly well, but they looked off. Like, they looked a step behind. They looked kind of tired. Like, they looked like a team that maybe had played the night before, but they hadn't. So it was kind of interesting. They just weren't quite quick enough. They just weren't quite aggressive enough, but it wasn't that they were playing bad. You could see that they were in it, but they just had a fatiguedness about them. I don't know what time most of the guys got in, or if they had a late practice, or what. Maybe there's a bunch of them are sick. I don't know. They just kind of looked out of step. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. Kirk definitely did not look as good in net. He definitely let in some goals that the previous two games he would have stopped easily. So maybe, a big part of it was just him, but it wasn't like the defense was hanging him out to dry. It's definitely one of those things that, for the most part, they were in the game. They just couldn't quite pull it out. And, it was an interesting game. Not the most exciting compared to some of them. Although one thing I did find interesting is, I think it was in the second quarter, both announcers were talking because I think it was Kirk had knocked the net off goal, and it looked like it should have been a goal, but it was ruled no goal. But there had also been a delayed penalty like right beforehand, so I don't know if there was a delay or what, because the camera wasn't quite on there. But they were saying, the net was moved, so that automatically cancels out the goal. And it's like, wait, you guys played, and you're saying this when, even as a fan who's never played, I know that if the goal is moved and the crease plane doesn't change, the goal plane, it's actually Rule 54.1 when the goal net is inadvertently moved by contact from a defensive player or goalie, and the offensive team is in possession, and they shoot, and it would have been a goal. It's still a goal. So it was kind of interesting that they were arguing that. There was a couple odd plays, some bad calls or non-existent calls, whichever you prefer. It was one of those kind of games. Nothing really stood out per se. It was one of that. The attendance seemed kind of less to me. I don't know if that's because this is like their third home game in a row, if maybe there was a storm. Maybe it just seemed less. I don't know. Did you watch this one, Tyler?
Yeah, I was able to pay attention to most of it leading up to the stealth broadcast. Minnesota came out strong, took an early lead, and never let it go. They did start Zach Higgins in goal, where previously they had started Brody McDonald in the first game. I'm not sure if he started the second game, but it was split. Their time-wise was like about 30 minutes each. But this time they went fully behind Zach Higgins, and I don't know if that was the root of the defense settling down, but they made a better effort. They gave up a bunch of goals in the first two games, and Minnesota did. But this time, even though they gave up, 13, that was enough to still hold on and get a win because their offense really clicked. I like their roster kind of up and down the floor right now for Minnesota. They're hit and miss. Obviously, you can't give up 20 to Colorado and then lose the next week and then come out and then beat New England, who was undefeated. So they're inconsistent, but the talent appears to be there right now. So if they can settle down, they could keep the East very interesting. And if New England is coming down from their high of winning the two games, you could easily see these two battling it out for one of those last playoff spots in the East if they don't surge up or whatever it takes for them to like fall out of the top spot where New England is. All right, I think that was about all I saw. I was kind of getting on the New England bandwagon there. I thought they really had we just moved to a new town, forget everything about the past, and play great. But they didn't. They just didn't get it together this time. And on the commentators, Steve Panarelli actually did the game, and he had previously done games for CBS Sports when they were broadcasting the NL playoffs a couple years ago. Actually had a recording of him doing the Stealth at Calgary Western Conference Championship game. He did a really great job. He played in the league. He actually played for the Stealth at one point, but he came from Syracuse. He's an American with a field background, but he can call a good game as a color commentator, and it was nice to hear him broadcasting because I really liked how he'd done it in the past, and he's still getting a chance to do it. That's my thoughts on the game.
Well, I watched a bit of this one. Basically, like Tyler said, I was actually waiting for the Calgary Edmonton game to start because it was on TSN in Canada. So I was able to watch that one in high def and everything. So that was good. But so I sort of watched bits of this one and yeah, I don't have much to add beyond what you guys said. I did notice that Logan Schuss was playing in this game again. They said at the beginning or before the season started that he wouldn't be able to play this season at all. So I guess any playing time they get out of him is gravy. So that's good for them. But he wasn't a huge factor again. I meant to look up his stats before, but he had a goal and a couple of assists, which is certainly not bad. But when your team scores 19, and you were basically their leading scorer last year, I would have expected more than 3 points out of Schuss, whereas they got 7 from Miles Thompson and 7 from Crawford and 7 from Shane Jackson. Pardon me, excuse me. So I don't know if Schuss is having a bit of a sophomore slump sort of thing, or the fact that I'm guessing it's a job-related thing, and I believe he's a Vancouver boy. So maybe the stress of going back and forth and not knowing until the day before or the day of that whether you can play is affecting him somehow. So hopefully he can get over that for the Swarm. Moving on to the next game, we don't have much to say because none of us were able to watch this one. Toronto-Rochester.
Thanks, NLL, for going from a point where we could watch every game in the past pretty much as a given and to the point where we're like, nope, can't watch two teams play anymore. It's too hard.
It didn't look like it was even possible in the U.S. and in Canada it was on TSN Go, which I guess probably most of the country has access to, or a good chunk of it, as long as you have either Bell or Rogers, which probably covers a good portion of the country. I'm on a company called Cogeco, which services a lot of southern Ontario and I believe parts of Quebec as well. But they don't support TSN Go, and I've asked the Cogeco people about it. They said, "Yep, we're working on it, but we don't have an ETA yet." Now, I don't know if we're working on it means maybe next week, possibly the week after, or sometime in the summer, or sometime in 2017, or anything else, or maybe they have one guy looking at it and it's just not a high priority for them. Maybe I'm the only guy asking. Who knows? They could easily just be telling me that to shut me up. But in any case, I couldn't watch it. You guys couldn't watch it. So all we can do, if I can find the numbers, is look over the numbers. And there aren't many of them because this was easily the lowest scoring game this year. Only 2 players had more than 2 points. Kevin Ross for Toronto had 4. Cody Jamieson for the Nighthawks had 4. The game was tied at 1 after the first quarter, tied at 2 after the second quarter, tied at 4 after the third quarter, so they doubled the scoring in the third. And then Toronto had a couple of leads in the fourth, but Rochester came back, tied it up, went ahead, and that was all she wrote. So from what I saw on Twitter, this was a great goalie battle between Matt Vince and Brandon Miller. Yeah, beyond the stats, I can't really tell you much more than that. You guys have any more insight than that?
The save percentages are kind of crazy. I mean, you look at the shots on goal. Brandon Miller faced 49 shots. Matt Vince faced 53. I mean, to have such a low-scoring game and both goalies facing about 50 shots, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, each team led for, well, Toronto led for about 18 minutes, Rochester led for about 17. So, I mean, this is about as even a game as you're going to get. So Rochester has got the monkey off of their back, so they finally have a win. Toronto is no longer undefeated. Of course, New England is no longer undefeated. But there's one other team that was undefeated, and that would be the Colorado Mammoth, who are playing the have-been-defeated Vancouver Stealth. I didn't watch this one because, like I said, the Edmonton-Calgary game was on at the same time, and that was on TV. The one thing I did notice, and I will let you guys get to this as well, was Johnny Powless, the savior of the franchise, if you believe the preseason hype, had 0 points, 0 shots on goal, and 1 loose ball. So I wasn't even sure if he played the whole game. Did he get injured, or was he just completely not a factor? Tyler, what did you think?
I'll comment on that quickly. It's like he did play the whole game, but he plays with Lewis Ratcliffe, and now he plays with Corey Small, who's very similar. Big, heavy shot takers as far as heavy being their volume of shots. And he's just getting out of the mix, and it's awful. For what they gave up for Small, they got a couple goals out of him in the first quarter. He was like ready to go. But for what they gave up for Powless, and they're getting nothing out of him, and I don't think it's Powless's fault. I don't think he doesn't get the ball in the stick. There's nothing he can do in that situation. And this part makes me think that now he's 21 at this point, maybe 22 years old, and being around somebody who's like more than 10 years older with Ratcliffe and Small's several years older, I don't know how comfortable Powless would be to like speak up, or he just feels like, yo, I'm the kid here. I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm just going to let the coaches work it out themselves versus assert himself. I don't know. But he needs to assert himself. When he does have the ball, good things have been happening. He had 6 assists in the loss to Buffalo. He can make plays happen, but he never had the ball. He can't do his work without the ball. So it's a bummer. But Melissa was there in person, so I want to hear her recap first because it'll be better than mine.
Well, it probably will be a little more positive. It was an interesting game. The refs, as typical, were kind of inconsistent. They're the first play of the game, essentially, the Mammoth got called for too many men, which I think that's a stupid mistake anyway. But first play of the game, that's when the refs are probably watching you the closest. Really, that was just bad. But there was a lot of things that went uncalled, a lot of over and backs, a lot of little things. I don't feel like slashes and things like that were called as much as we've seen in some of the other games. And I think that actually did cause it to start getting a little chippier towards the end of the game because the refs just kind of swallowed their whistles and weren't calling anything, which on one hand is nice because it keeps the flow of the game, but the other hand, it's like you start seeing things happen that the refs should be calling, and it can be frustrating. I know the Mammoth got away with some dirty shots that should have been called. I know that the South got away with some dirty shots that should have been called. I mean, from sitting on a player to just cheap shots. It definitely, the refs let it go a little too much. Second quarter, the shots on goal were nearly identical between the two teams, but when you looked at the score, it was very different. I think Richards just couldn't quite find his groove, whereas Ward did, because they both looked a little rough to begin with. But it really seemed like the defense was just letting Richards out on his own. And there's enough good shooters on the team that you just can't really do that. But one thing that I did notice that I thought was kind of interesting and may have actually played a factor later in the game is the stealth defense, or offense, what was it? Yeah, stealth defense. You guys have some really big guys. Like 240, 220, I mean, some big guys. So they were doing a great job, to keep the Mammoth away from the goal to begin with. But, I mean, altitude sickness and altitude whatever else, it really does impact players. So it kind of made me wonder, did they fatigue just that much later on? I mean, Tim Henderson, I don't know how many times he's ever played in Colorado, but they looked a lot slower, and they weren't able to stop the defense or the Mammoth offense in the fourth quarter, whereas the first quarter, they really were shutting them down. The Mammoths were struggling to roll around them, shoot around them, do anything. They were just basically in control. But that was definitely very different in the fourth. Richards, it was basically on his own, facing a talented offense and apparently defense, because the Mammoth actually had 9 different players score goals. And with John Grant Jr. on the team, that's probably more amazing because usually it's him and maybe 2 others. But Adam Jones had a franchise record. He had 10 points with 4 goals and 6 assists. Alex Turner, who's new on the team, he had 4 goals. John Grant Jr. had 2 goals and 5 assists. So, I mean, there was a lot of scoring going on. It definitely, the Mammoth looked really cocky in the third towards the end, and I think the Stealth, if they actually would have had more fire in them or whatever it was they were lacking, I think they could have turned it around like they did a couple weeks ago against Calgary, because the Mammoth, they were starting to go into trick shot mode and kind of goof off mode a little bit towards the end of the third. You could just see a general cockiness. And then going into the fourth with 8 minutes left, they actually put in Bouquet, and Stealth did score twice, but it seemed to wake the Mammoth up and go, oh, wait, we actually do have to still play. So it was very one-sided, and I don't know what it was, because the Stealth definitely showed potential, but there wasn't a fire in them like they usually have. I mean, I don't know, maybe you have more to say about it, Tyler.
It was very one-sided. It was 3-3 at the end of the first, and that was with Sean Pollock just sneaking one in with a second left, or else the Stealth would have had a 3-2 lead. And that was with the Mammoth really playing a bad quarter. If they had played the first quarter like they played the other 3 quarters, this game would have been just laughable. I mean, it already was, but it would have been out of control. They scored 6, 6, and 5 goals in the other quarters, so if you put another 2 on, be 22-9 or 24-9. It would have been just terrible. Yeah, we already touched on Corey Small coming in. Between him and Ratcliffe, Palace is not getting the ball at all. I try to wear like a nice lacrosse shirt to be on the lacrosse podcast, but instead I'm wearing my video game shirt because the Stealth D is whoever plays against him gets video game stats. It's the second time this season somebody's had 10 points against him. And in other games, I think Sean Evans maybe had 8 in the only game they've won. There's anybody can team up right now. So trading for Corey Small is nice, but that's not the side of the floor where they're having problems, or the end of the floor. They need to get healthy on D, and until they do, I'm going to watch the games and just enjoy the experience. But it's going to be a long season the way things are going right now. The other thing I noticed with picking up Small is the Stealth. They ran, I think, 7 forwards this game. Usually they only run 6 to fill the 5 spots. And by usually, I mean every game I've ever seen them play for like 10 years. I've never seen them run an extra forward and thinning out the D even more when that's where I feel all their problems lie. That was an interesting choice. So whatever it is, they'll change it. They'll make an announcement or change tomorrow because I think it's their standard clockwork. We record and then they'll make a move the next day. We recorded last Sunday and they trade for Small on Monday, and usually they record on Mondays and they'll make some change on Tuesday. So based on us being the key to the NLL transaction universe, tomorrow there'll be new Stealth changes, and we'll see what they get to bring out for the next game. I don't want to see much else about it. It was tough to watch. It just makes me appreciate the good runs we had all those years of beating the Mammoth, because it's not going to happen for a little while with what they have right now.
I mean, even some of the big players like Dutch, it didn't seem like he had the ball that much. Like, they weren't really fighting for the loosies. The first half definitely was a little different, but the second half, it was like they had no fire. And I don't know. I mean, Vancouver's relatively high altitude, I think.
No,
maybe one of you guys can.
They're sea level. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the altitude really did play an impact. I don't know.
But it never has in the past. I mean, for years they go in there without fear.
Actually, I had grabbed it to run some stats on it because it seemed like just in general the Stealth were a much heavier team.
Yeah. Yeah, they got big bodies out there, but that doesn't solve the problems. You need smart bodies, not just heavy bodies.
Well, heavy bodies fatigue quicker.
Yeah.
When you have spry little guys running around you.
Yep.
Well, I did look up some stats this week about the Vancouver Stealth versus the Mammoth. I didn't go back to the Washington or San Jose versions of the team, but the Vancouver and Colorado have been very even over the past year and a bit. I know obviously they've only met each other 5 times total, but they've scored exactly the same number of goals. There have been 3 one-goal games and 2 blowouts. So I don't know, read what you will into that. There's 3. I think the Mammoth are now 3-2 against the Stealth, but like I said, 3 of those games were 1 goal. The other one was like 20-10 or 21-11 or something like that, and then this one 20-9. So, yeah, 3 close ones and 2 blowouts. So it seems awfully even now. Like I said, I didn't go back to the Washington days, but presumably these guys will meet 2 or 3 more times this season. So we'll see what happens there.
We actually play next week, I think, against them in Vancouver.
True. Yep, that's another game that we're predicting for next week, which we will get to right after the final game of the weekend, which was Edmonton-Calgary. I watched this one. Looks like Melissa watched this one as well. So seeing as we saw the same thing with the Washington, I guess, a few years ago, where they went to the finals. They went to the finals again. They lost Chris Hall and were the worst team in the league. Then they got Chris Hall back and they went to the finals again. the difference that a really good coach can make to a team, particularly a coach that's been there for a number of years and knows all the players really well, the difference is unbelievable when they're there versus when they're not. So the fact that Derek Keenan was returning to the rush bench this weekend, if I had known that before making our picks in that last week, I might have changed my pick, which, as it turns out, would have been a good idea, because they just looked like a different team last week than they did against Buffalo the previous week. So Mark Matthews had a great game. Ben McIntosh looked good. Riley Lowen looked good. Robert Church, Jared Day, all these guys just had great games, and their offense was clicking. They were passing the ball really well. It looked like Matthews was trying to be the Josh Sanderson of that team and just set everybody else up. And I'll score a few goals myself here and there, but most of the time I'm passing it back and forth and getting everybody else set up, sort of the quarterback kind of thing. And that seemed to be working. I don't know what's going on with Mike Poulin. Not having the greatest year so far, obviously. It looked like they were trying to pull him at one point, and he said no, so he stayed in. And later on, they said, "No, I don't care if you're saying no, you're coming out now." He had a 60% save percentage in that game, so he was just not seeing the ball at all. There were a couple of stops that he made that were impressive, sort of reminding you of the Poulin of old. But for the most part, he just didn't seem to be seeing the ball very well. Calgary, I don't know what's going on with the Roughnecks. I mean, nobody expected them to be 0-3. I think somebody tweeted today that they've never been 0-3 in the history of the franchise. So the fact that they're 0-3 now is kind of hard to take in. But 3 different times in this game they had too many men penalties, which is just really the dumbest penalty you can take, really. And it's not just that they had a bad change where somebody was coming off and they sent somebody out just a little too early and that sort of thing. This was actually, they had 6 players out on the floor. So somebody on the bench just can't count or isn't paying attention, or somebody took it on themselves to hop over the bench and join the play or whatever it was. But 3 different times in this game. There's no... I can't imagine Malowski is too pleased with that. Couple of big fights near the end, and it is not really unexpected in a game that's kind of a blowout. I mean, Edmonton won by 8, and the Roughnecks were just not happy at all. So near the end, there were 2 different fights at the same time. Didn't see much of one of them because the camera was focused on the other. But Dane Doby and Ryan Dilks got into it at one end of the floor. And at the other end, it was, who did I say it was? Sean Evans and Chris Corbeil, which was kind of a fight, but not really, because Evans just got pounded. Corbeil just basically got him in a headlock and just rained down the punches on him for a while. And to his credit, Evans took it. He didn't try to get away. He was trying to get free so that he could continue the fight. And eventually he did and got a couple of punches in as well. But for the most part, that was awfully one-sided. I didn't have too much else to say. Melissa, what did you think?
This was another game where I don't think the score was as reflective, because it did seem like the Roughnecks were all in it. They just couldn't quite seem to capitalize. Their shot selection was maybe a little poorer. They seemed to be aiming at the center of the chest, things like that. But it was a very transition-heavy game. Like, it was so back and forth, just one play right after another. So maybe they just got worn out a little bit more. I don't know. And of course, whenever you have transition plays back to back to back to back to back to back like that, then you're obviously not converting. And so that was definitely an issue for them. They just weren't converting. I do think Poulin probably should have been pulled a little bit sooner, but it's not like the backup actually did that well. So maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. It was an interesting game. It was definitely exciting at moments. I mean, the first half was really close. It was just the second half. The Calgary offense couldn't seem to convert, and they couldn't seem to shut down Edmonton's defense, and they just looked off their game, kind of like with New England in Minnesota. You didn't see a lot of you just didn't see that gelling that you really have come to expect from Calgary. Last year at this point, they were already looking like a potential playoff team. They just looked so strong, and right now they seem out of step. I mean, with the Stealth, you can almost argue with Chris Hall's passing that, that's just had a bigger impact. You really haven't had quite as much with Calgary, so I don't know what's going on with them, but obviously they need to make some changes. Something's going on. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I was able to watch this game. It was a pretty good match because you get the run and gun, and so if you just want to sit back and see goals scored, we got that. It definitely was not as close. Like at half, the score was 8-6, but that was like 2 late goals quickly by Dane Dobby, and so it really was like 8-4 if you take those 2 out, and they doubled them up later in the game as well. The 16-8 final. Kermalaski started off the season 0-2 and got a contract extension, and then they come out and basically lay an egg against their biggest rivals, so that's nice job security. I don't know how you can pull that off in some sense. If Calgary only played on the short end of the floor where their bench was closest to the goal, like Dane Dobby would have scoring records. I mean, on those fast breaks when he runs down and gets the ball, and it's just like catch the ball in fast break, step, shot, and it's incredible. He just buries them almost perfectly every single time, and I don't like the 2 quarters of the game when Calgary's at home and in that situation. Boy, I dread those quarters because in transition they're lethal. Let's see what else I got. Boy, Nick Bilic from Edmonton is fast. 2 times in the game, you see him get a loose ball, and there's like a Calgary player, and he just goes around, and he's pulling away, which is awesome, but there's also the equalizer of the length of the lacrosse stick. He just ran around, shot Evans 1 time, but Evans just held up just enough so that when Bilic came to shoot, he just was able to whack the stick and dislodge it, so it didn't really end up meaning anything other than there was a loss of possession for Calgary. But boy, that speed was something else. I always thought Ryan Dilks was the fastest guy available, but Bilic was blowing him out of the water. And play-by-play. I mean, I talked about it in New England as well, so you don't usually care about this stuff, but Teddy Jenner has moved up into the press box and started calling games for these TSN games. He was in Vancouver last week, and both games he's working with Jason Greger, who's been calling the Edmonton games for years on their NLL, probably their radio feed, but also their NLL video streams. And he's been calling them by himself, so he's used to just calling games, and he's primo. I mean, the top-notch play-by-play guy in the league right now. The way whenever a goal happens, and scores, and he's fun to listen to. He's got great energy, makes a broadcast better, and then Teddy's knowledge of the game, players, and they've only done like 2 games together, but they've got good camaraderie, and they're putting out good broadcasts. Good on TSN for locking up those 2 to do their games.
I actually would love to add some to that. I like the fact that they're relatively, because you expect a home team announcers to be a little biased or things like that, and they've actually been relatively unbiased and actually kind of saying like it is. I mean, a good point to highlight that is when Dixon took a really solid hit from, what was it, Cornwall. I knew Cornfield didn't sound right. Cornfield played for us. Cornwall. And, it was a really solid hit. It sent him tumbling into another Rush player, took him out. And Cornwall actually dislocated his shoulder. But it was good to hear them say that looked like a good legal hit. There's definitely some announcing teams in the league that would have been like, oh, that was, illegal, and they just would have been very biased. They're there's definitely been some very big instances that is very clearly a different way, and the announcers are about as passionate about it as Willie B is, for the team, which there's something to be said for homerism, but there's a time and place, and especially on a broadcast team, I really appreciate a team that is going to tell it like it is, give a little bit of color, maybe even a little bias, but keeping it relatively minimal, so even if you're not a fan of the home team, you don't feel alienated watching the game, or that it's so biased that you actually will turn their announcing off and turn on a radio feed, which I have done with some announcers. So just want to throw that out there. Did you have anything else, Tyler?
No, that covered the things that caught my eye during the game. Edmonton looks good. Keenan, like Graham said, is very important, and I fear playing them the rest of the year, despite the way they started the season.
We did have a question come in regarding like the white jerseys and whether or not maybe that impacts how well the goalies are able to see the ball, and maybe with the Rush's jerseys, the ball was really getting lost on them. I don't know if either of you had an opinion on that.
I can see the theory to it. It also makes me think that this is all Keenan, because previously it was the Portland Lumberjacks, and they had, I call it the pajama uniforms. They had white shorts and white jerseys that were just white, tons of white, and the alternate color was like yellow. I mean, there was nothing dark on there. One of the letters were like, their numbers were in black, but really it was so much, not even, you couldn't believe it. And so if there is something to it, and I would say Keenan knows it, because he's basically set that up for both his teams now.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add there other than white jerseys have been used in a lot of NLL teams have used at least some white in their jerseys most of the time. I guess the tradition was been your home jerseys are white or light color and your away jerseys are dark. A lot of teams are getting away from that and just picking one of them. But it's been around for years. If it's a significant advantage, then every team has it and every team knows about it. So I don't imagine that it's some cheating thing that one team is doing that the other teams are like, hey, you can't do that. Well, you could too if you wanted to. So I don't know if that's that huge of a thing. I did want to add something to the talk that we had about the previous game. I agree that Jenner and Gregor did a great job on the broadcast, and there does seem to be a lot of chemistry between them. Like you said, Jenner knows the game inside out and backwards, so having him give his opinion on what was going on is really helpful. And I agree with you as well that they didn't seem to be. It wasn't like they had the Calgary team calling this game or they had the Edmonton team calling this game. They just had a team calling this game, and they weren't pro-Calgary. They weren't pro-Edmonton. They were just telling you what was happening in the game. And while a bit of homerism, I don't have a big problem with. When you're watching a game, say that you're watching a Toronto game, and it's called by the Toronto team, and the game is only broadcast in Toronto. Well, if they want to be pro-Toronto and go us and that kind of thing, well, that's fine. But all these games are broadcast across the country, around the world. You don't want to have that homerism, at least not to the extreme. Chris Driscoll is one of the announcers for Rochester, and he was one of my favorite players when he played for the Rock. I thought he was very underrated. The Rock had him. I mean, this is a guy that had 80, 90 points when he played for the New York Saints, and they had him playing defense, and he was a great defensive player. But he is so pro Rochester on the feed or on the video feed now. It's I don't like it. I don't like listening to him. I distinctly remember a game that was a Toronto Rochester game a couple of years ago where there was some crazy transition play where I don't know if it was Jesse Gamble, it might have been Damon Edwards. One of these guys came flying up the floor and just scored a beautiful goal. And Driscoll just kind of said, well, that was a pretty good pass, but it's kind of unfortunate when these things happen. Well, no, it's not. If you're a Rochester fan, it's unfortunate, but don't talk like it's just a generally unfortunate thing. So that kind of thing got under my skin. So it was nice to see Jenner and Gregor doing a great job of keeping it unbiased. So I guess we will move on to our game predictions now. We had a decent week, I guess, considering the previous few weeks. I believe I got 2 right, Tyler got 1, and Melissa got 0. My mistake. This was not a good week at all. Yeah, sorry about that, Melissa.
Hey, my rationale was sound. The teams are just too inconsistent right now. But my rationale was sound. I would still probably make the same picks.
Well, there were 3 games where all 3 of us agreed on the picks, and we got all 3 of those wrong. So yeah, I'd say it's the teams that are doing it badly instead of us. So having said that, let's move on with this week's picks. We have another 5 games to talk about. Yeah, so I guess I'll go first. I just have a couple of quick comments on each one. Minnesota Buffalo. Minnesota obviously looked really good last week, scoring a zillion goals against the Black Wolves. I'm still going to go for Buffalo in this one. I don't really know whether it's a bias against Minnesota, where I've just assumed that they're going to finish last or second last in the East this year, and any game they play well is an anomaly. Maybe that's true. Maybe they've turned their thing around, and this is like the way they played last week is the way they're going to play the rest of the season. Who knows? But for now, I'm going for Buffalo. New England and Edmonton. This might be the same thing, except in reverse, in that I picked Edmonton to win almost every game last year, and I was right. So I'm assuming that this is going to happen again this year. The way they played last week was a lot closer to the way they played last year. And New England played, like you said, Melissa, New England played pretty well in the last game, but not as well as the previous couple. Who knows what that means going forward, but I'm going with Edmonton on this one. Calgary, Toronto. This one was tough. I mean, Toronto's played really well in the games that I've seen. Obviously, I didn't see the Rochester game, but they're 3-1. Calgary's 0-3. Seems logical to pick Toronto. Picking Calgary to go 0-4 just seems painful, and I can't. I'm having a hard time not picking Calgary just for that reason. But I'm going to go with Toronto. Buffalo, Rochester. Rochester looked really good. They looked pretty good in one of their losses, and pretty crappy in the other couple. Obviously, they've pulled something together, and they cleaned up their defense against the Rock on Saturday. But I think they're too good a team to continue the way they played in the first couple. And Colorado, Vancouver, just judging by what we saw on Saturday, I got to go with Colorado on that one as well. And like you said, Tyler, they're going to make some huge change tomorrow that's going to invalidate our picks. But for now, I'm going with the Mammoth. Tyler, what do you think?
Because my picks are going about as well as the Stell season, could I just pass? No, so Minnesota at Buffalo. I'm going to go with Buffalo. Minnesota's performance last week felt like an anomaly. It's not their not guaranteed, but it's not their consistent effort. The dynamic duo of Benesh and Dane Smith look awesome, and I would take them right now over Minnesota. New England, Edmonton. Pains me to say it, but I like a Derek Keenan coached rush team. They're solid. Every person on the floor is a capable player working as a team. It's hard to pick against them. Calgary at Toronto. You look at Calgary and think they are incredibly talented. What's the problem? And I don't know. But they have some people on that team who I feel like can't handle adversity very well. And they're having some adversity. They're 0-3. and Coach Malosky is the kind of guy that's going to yell at him to get better and maybe not sit down and not kumbaya type solve the problem stuff. But if you're an 0-3 team, I don't know that yelling is going to fix that problem. I think they need to just be told that they're good and that they can do it. I would go the opposite way, but it's totally a personality thing for me. But because they're 0-3, going on the road against a pretty good Toronto team right now, I'll pick Toronto at home and really see what happens when Calgary goes 0-4. And they could just become head cases all season or something. That'd be interesting. Buffalo at Rochester. I mean, Rochester held Toronto to 6 goals. That's a great play, but I like Buffalo playing that before, kind of getting warmed up, going an hour down the road, and just coming out strong against Rochester and getting the win. In Colorado at Vancouver, there's nothing about what I saw last night that says Vancouver even has a chance in this game. I don't care if they're going home. I don't care if they learn from every mistake. If they got their pride, they're getting called out for whatever reason. The stealth D cannot stop the Mammoth offense or any offense really, except for Calgary's for some reason. That was a different D. Everybody was healthy. So Colorado will take that game. On to you, Melissa.
I have a lot of the same picks. So Buffalo and Minnesota, I'm going with Buffalo. As Tyler said, Minnie looked pretty good this past weekend, but they haven't shown me enough that I am willing to pick them over a team that seems to be clicking a little more solidly. A few different plays in the game, and Buffalo might have won that one. So I'm going to go with Buffalo. New England and Edmonton was a little harder. Part of me definitely wants to pick New England because they've been clicking so well, but I think the fact that Edmonton is a very different style team than they played so far, with Keenan back, they definitely look better. I think they might actually just come out firing all cylinders, and they might really surprise New England. But I wouldn't be surprised if that one goes down to overtime either. So that one was a little bit of a hard pick, but I went with Edmonton. Calgary and Toronto. I never would have thought I would be picking against Calgary pretty much every game at this point now. I just don't know what's gotten into them, and they have a lot of things to overcome, and I know from watching the Mammoth when they had their 4-game win season that's a hard monkey to get off their back. So we'll see if they can do it, but I'll pick Toronto until then. Buffalo and Rochester, I'm going to go with Rochester. I think Buffalo struggles a little bit more with the back-to-back games, so they might burn themselves out in one game or the other. I just don't see them taking both. I think between Colorado and Vancouver, if every time I choose Colorado to lose, they win, I'm going to be okay with that. So we're going to pick Vancouver, who I think Colorado's going to go in rather cocky against, and I think Vancouver might actually come out fired up. So picking Vancouver makes them win. I'll pick Vancouver.
With great power comes great responsibility. So pick wisely.
Okay, with that responsibility out of the way, I guess we are done with this episode. So thanks for watching. Our website is addictedtolacrosse.com. All of our shows are archived there from this season and from last season if you want to watch those. You can find us at feedback@addictedtolacrosse.com. Send us email there. We're on Facebook as well, facebook.com/laxpodcast, and of course on Twitter, laxpodcast there as well. So I guess that's it. This has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for watching. We will see you next week.